Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to our webinar today entitled FDA E-cigarettes, Everything You Need to Know. My name is Merissa. I'm a staff attorney at the Public Health Law Center. Thank you for joining us for this important and timely discussion. I'm joined today by my colleague, Desmond Jenson, a lead staff attorney, and we all work in the commercial tobacco team at the Public Health Law Center. First, a little bit about the Public Health Law Center. We are a nonprofit legal center housed at the Mitchell Hamlin School of Law in St. Paul, Minnesota. Our center consists of attorneys, policy analysts, planners, communication staff, and an amazing administrative team. We work to advance public health through the power of law. We have two main policy teams, one that focuses on commercial tobacco regulation, which is a team that we are on, and the other one that focuses on healthy and culturally competent eating and physical activity. Our main work is done through what we call legal technical assistance, which includes legal research, policy, development, implementation, defense. We have publications and trainings. But however, we don't do any lobbying or direct representation. And we offer this free legal assistance to communities, advocates, health departments, and others working on commercial tobacco control around the United States.
Oh, thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
We've got a fair amount to cover today, but where I want to start us off is some contextualizing of the youth e-cigarette epidemic, and particularly the role of JUUL. We'll talk about what the FDA has been up to, and then look ahead to the immediate future. So this isn't new for most of you, I'm sure. E-cigarette use by high school students has been growing consistently for a while. This is data from the National Youth Tobacco Survey from 2011 through 2020. We are particularly concerned with the last few years when the numbers have reached epidemic proportions. The numbers this year fell, but only really back to where we were in 2018. And there are a variety of reasons for that that are really unrelated to strong regulation. I'm sure you could think of a few of them. We should also be very concerned about use by middle school students, which is following the same trajectory as high school students. So what I'm going to show you in the next few slides attempts to answer the question of why this has happened and why it wasn't prevented. And we're going to do that by looking at e-cigarette sales data, which is one of my favorite markers for how to understand what's happening in the world. Okay, so what you're seeing on this slide, and if you minimized me, I would encourage you to restore your screen because there's gonna be a lot of charts and graphs and a lot of visuals. I'm a visual learner and that helps me. So hopefully that will help all of you as well. So what you're seeing on the screen is monthly e-cigarette sales in millions. And this is from 2018 until late, or 2015 until late 2019. Now, this is Nielsen data. It includes data from most retailers that sell e-cigarettes, but it doesn't include vape shops and it doesn't include online sales. Each of the colors here represents one of the largest e-cigarette manufacturers. And you can see that for these companies, sales have been relatively flat for quite some time. But you probably noticed I left off JUUL. And essentially, all of the growth of the e-cigarette market that's happened in the last 3 years can be attributed to JUUL. In fact, when the other companies have had short-term or some steady growth, it's because they've introduced products that mimic the unique features of JUUL. Now let's connect some dots. So this is the trend of high school e-cigarette use, along with the e-cigarette market growth. Obviously, we're on two different axes, so those two are have no relation to one another, but you can see a trend, right? It's going to surprise none of you that JUUL's growth since 2016 has a direct correlation with an increase in youth e-cigarette use. And given what we know about JUUL's marketing tactics and its product innovations, this is a pretty common sense outcome. In 2018, when the e-cigarette market sat at about $300 million in sales per month, there were about 3 million kids buying and using e-cigarettes. Jump forward a year, and it's 4 million kids, and it's $400 million per month in sales. So at least during that period of time, it was a direct correlation. Now, I want to pivot slightly to a discussion of the role of flavors in youth initiation. I'm going to highlight a very recent paper published by folks at the CDC Foundation, and the Truth Initiative. And special thanks to my friends at those three organizations for letting me use their charts and add a little bit of my own touch to them. So we're going to look at three of their charts, but I'm going to encourage you to go read this article as well. So this chart, which is fantastic, shows you precisely how the e-cigarette market has changed over time and why. And it also uses market data. So we're again looking at e-cigarette sales over time. Obviously, we've got information on flavors, but first I'm just going to point out that this chart uses unit sales. The chart I showed you a minute ago was dollar sales. And both of these are really a perfectly fine measure of the market. In fact, if you overlay the dollar chart that I just showed you with the unit chart, you can see the trends are identical. It's just a slightly different measure. So on the unit chart, it's worth restating that because you don't see the companies any longer, that JUUL has such a huge share of the market that when we start looking at trends of the market as a whole, based on flavor, you can attribute most of the dramatic macro changes almost entirely to JUUL. But I want to look at a couple of events first that are going to affect aggregate sales, and they create some peaks and valleys that are worth taking a moment to explain. So there's a peak here in late 2018 that we're going to talk about more. But what happened was JUUL was unable to keep up with demand after it voluntarily removed some of its products from retail stores. You can see another peak in mid-2019. That was very early in the EVALI outbreak. EVALI, if you have forgotten, was e-cigarette and vaping associated lung injury. You probably recall that at the beginning of that epidemic, sales of vaping products dropped off very quickly because the cause was totally unknown. So that's why you can see a decline of all product sales right at the beginning of that event. And then finally, as EVALI waned, the current pandemic turned the world upside down. So I want to highlight these events just so that you can see that even though e-cigarette sales have been in a decline and youth initiation has decreased, those are really temporary circumstances, and they're totally unrelated to regulation. Okay, so I want to turn to the most important part of this chart, which is the fact that it breaks down sales over time by flavor. If you're unaware, in the US, JUUL has been marketed in 8 different flavors: mint and menthol, which are different flavors, creme, cucumber, fruit, and mango, and then 2 tobacco flavors. So when you take those flavors and you put them into this chart's categories, this is the breakdown. Menthol and mint each have their own category. Creme, cucumber, fruit, and mango all fall into the all other flavors category. Mango was JUUL's most popular flavor for a very long time. And most of the sales of the all other flavors category are JUUL's mango pods. Now remember, this chart shows all e-cigarette sales, not just JUUL. But JUUL has sold so many mango pods that it's making up the largest portion of that part of the chart. So I've colored it according to JUUL's colors that they use in their marketing, just sort of make that connection for you. And then JUUL's 2 tobacco flavored pods go into the tobacco category. There's a very small, hard to read category that's not available. It's just a blue line that sits at the top of each bar. Apologies that that's hard to see. It's really an unimportant category, so there's not really anything to worry about there. It's related to anomalies in the data where there isn't a clear flavor link to a product. It's not going to be related to most of JUUL's products for sure. Okay, as you probably picked up, the 3 most important flavors that we're going to be discussing are menthol, mint, and mango. And the relative position of those flavors over time will, in my opinion, tell you everything about who is responsible for the youth e-cigarette epidemic and what decisions are driving things. So this is where we examine the market through the lens of JUUL's business practices. This is some information that maybe isn't entirely clear to everybody, but when you contextualize it, I think it becomes very clear. So for most of JUUL's history, from 2015 through late 2018, which we've highlighted in green here on this timeline, it sold all 8 of its flavors at both retail and online. At the end of that period, I've circled mango for you. So you can see that the proportion of mango compared to other flavors, and you can just see how dominant that flavor really was. Now, as I alluded to earlier, as a result of pressure from public health folks, from media scrutiny, there were congressional hearings, and a few letters from the FDA, JUUL actually decided to pull 4 of its flavors from retail stores and only sell them on its website. And the flavors were all of those that fit into the all other flavors category on the chart, which again is creme, cucumber, fruit, and most importantly, mango. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this actually created a nationwide shortage of JUUL pods. JUUL's supply chain just hadn't been prepared for 4 of its flavors to be pulled from stores, and there weren't enough of the remaining 4 flavors to supply demand. So that caused a temporary drop in sales. But as soon as JUUL could ship enough of its mint pods, the market was growing again. And at this point, you can see mint becomes the best-selling flavor. Not surprisingly, as public health advocates pushed back on JUUL's continued sales of mint and menthol, JUUL reacted by completely discontinuing sales of all of its flavors other than menthol and its 2 tobacco flavors until they could be reviewed by the FDA, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. Not surprisingly to any of us, I'm sure, menthol became the #1 flavor for the first time. There's a lesson here about exempting flavors from regulation, which we can touch on more as well. So let's turn to what the FDA has been doing and not doing, and hopefully it'll be clear to you, if it isn't already, that the FDA's actions are entirely reactive, not proactive. JUUL and other companies are adapting, and the FDA has not been anticipating their next moves, even though some of those moves are entirely predictable. Now, in order to understand the scope of the FDA's failure, you need to understand the FDA's authority to regulate e-cigarettes. It gets a little complicated, but we'll make it as simple as we need to just for this. When the Tobacco Control Act passed in 2009, it required the FDA to regulate cigarettes, smokeless tobacco, and roll your own tobacco. And for any other product that is made or derived from tobacco and intended for human consumption, the FDA had to go through its rulemaking process, which it didn't start until 2014 and didn't finish until 2016. So that means that the FDA couldn't do anything related to e-cigarettes until 2016. So you should also know that the FDA's Tobacco Product Authority includes pre-market review of products, and that looks fairly similar to the FDA's Drug Authority, where a product isn't allowed to be introduced to the market until after it's been authorized by the FDA. So once e-cigarettes were subject to the FDA's jurisdiction in 2016, the products were required to be reviewed by the FDA before they could be sold. But that's not how things have been implemented. The FDA ultimately decided that e-cigarettes could stay on the market for several years beyond when pre-market review was first required for them. In fact, the FDA's plan was much more lenient than the one that you'll see here. But luckily, public health groups sued the FDA and won. And so now, in September, this past September, manufacturers finally had to apply to the FDA for pre-market review. And next year, FDA authorization will be required to stay on the market. So since August of 2016, the FDA has been using its discretion to allow e-cigarettes to remain on the market. It could have, at any time, ordered any e-cigarette to be removed from the market and forced the manufacturer to apply to re-enter the market. So pre-market review is an incredibly powerful tool, and the FDA has squandered it. So the moment that JUUL was under scrutiny, the FDA could have removed all of its products from the market and forced the company to prove that its products meet statutory standards. And obviously that didn't happen. Instead, the FDA made headlines for a series of actions that had no real impact on the market. It requested information from JUUL and sent warning letters, but never ordered the removal of its products from the market, which it could have done. You don't need to read through this entire timeline of selected events because I'm going to highlight for you 2 crucial actions. When the FDA formally proposed action and then formally acted on e-cigarette flavors, each time it retroactively ratified something that JUUL had already voluntarily done. As we discussed, JUUL voluntarily removed mango and other flavors from stores, but left mint on the market. Shortly after that, the FDA proposed to take action on flavors, but it proposed to exempt mint from that action. Then again, after JUUL voluntarily suspended sales of mint, the FDA was fine with including mint within the scope of its action, but JUUL left menthol on the market, and the FDA also exempted that flavor. Now, this isn't to say that JUUL is somehow the good guy. That's not what I want you to take away. What I want you to see is that when the FDA acted, it was following the industry's lead. And that is not what effective regulation looks like. That's what industry self-regulation looks like. So we're going to look at a couple more charts from that MMWR article, which again, I would encourage people to read. But in order to make sense of them, you have to understand a little bit about the FDA's action on flavors. So when the FDA acted, it made a distinction between cartridge-based e-cigarettes like JUUL and disposable products like Puffbar. Hopefully people know about Puffbar. We'll use that as an example of disposable products. Even if you don't know about Puffbar, what you need to know for this is that products like JUUL, the cartridge-based products, sell their devices and cartridges or pods separately. The device is rechargeable, you buy additional pods and insert the pods, and only the pods are discarded. With disposable products like Puffbar, the device and the pod are inseparable, and once the nicotine is used up, the entire unit is discarded, and then the user buys an entirely new device that's pre-filled with nicotine. So the devices operate slightly differently, but they're not really used by youth or adults differently. But despite this, the FDA decided to treat them differently. So for JUUL and similar devices, the cartridge-based products, the FDA acted on all flavors except tobacco and menthol. However, for disposable products, the FDA allowed all flavors to remain on the market. Now, before I show you how this plays out, I want to highlight for you something you may have picked up already, and it's that the FDA's action is inherently temporary. Now, because the FDA is using its discretion in enforcing pre-market review, what it's done is force JUUL and other companies to remove their products from the market now, but they are free to apply to get permission to market those products again in the future. And it's possible, if not likely, that in the future the FDA will authorize the sale of flavored e-cigarettes like JUUL. So this action is only effective in the short term. It's entirely possible that JUUL Mango could return to stores if the FDA allows it. All right, we'll turn to the sales charts from the MMWR. We're going to look at two separate charts. So they separate cartridge-based and disposable products into two different charts. So first we'll look at cartridge-based products, again, like JUUL. Now, we're not looking at total units. We're actually looking at flavors as a percentage of the unit sales. So this is a better way to show you the ebb and flow of the popularity of various flavor categories. So we'll walk through a couple of events. Not surprisingly, when JUUL hit the market, its mango flavor took off pretty quickly. JUUL was also the only brand selling a mint flavor at that point, so the immediate growth after that event of both mint and mango is entirely JUUL. And you can see there's a decrease in tobacco and menthol to make up for that. And you can see after that absolute steady growth and then exponential growth of mango in the short term. And then, as we discussed already, JUUL eventually voluntarily removed mango. And not surprisingly, sales of the all other flavors dropped off considerably. Now remember, JUUL's mango was the only flavor that was removed at that point. So that you can see is the effect of JUUL removing just its mango. And then again, when JUUL was able to ship enough of its mint pods, mint starts to displace mango as the dominant flavor in the market. And then JUUL pulled mint, which dropped off immediately, and again is quickly replaced by menthol, which you may notice was the smallest category before that action and quickly became the most popular flavor. So the FDA's action happens at this point. And you can see that it has virtually no change on the trajectory of mint or menthol. Those trends are merely continuing from what happened after JUUL's action. The only impact that the FDA's action has is to finish off what was left of the all other flavors category. That would have been brands other than JUUL that had flavors that weren't mint, menthol, or tobacco. You can see those products didn't really make up a huge portion of the market, and users switched mostly to menthol. So when it comes to JUUL and products similar to JUUL, the FDA's action really just ratified the status quo, which was created by JUUL, not by adequate regulation. Now we turn to disposable products. Again, I'm highlighting Puffbar as an example. It became a replacement product as JUUL stopped selling its most popular flavors. I'll also highlight for you that because Puffbar was new to the market in 2019, by the FDA's own policies, it should have never been sold legally. We'll talk more about this in a few minutes too. It took the FDA until July of this year to warn Puffbar of its illegal sales. And again, at that point, the company had already ceased distribution in the US. So the disposable market is far less chaotic in its trends, but there's a couple of things here to highlight. One important trend is that after JUUL removed mango from the market, you can see a clear increase in sales of the all other flavors. Now, this is almost certainly due to many youth picking up Puffbar after JUUL pods became harder to acquire, and Puffbar came in a variety of flavors that JUUL no longer sold. JUUL's removal of mint doesn't have a huge impact on this market, but at this point, all other flavors are clearly dominating, and that trend merely continues. The FDA's action here has maybe only one impact, and it's maybe speculation. You can see there's a decrease in the sales of menthol products. I would speculate that because menthol became the only flavor available for the cartridge-based products, the menthol varieties of JUUL and other products had a larger presence at the point of sale, and so the products became more popular at the expense of the disposable menthol products. So, said another way, if you were going to the store to buy a menthol e-cigarette, it was probably easier to get your hands on JUUL than Puffbar at that point. Again, the FDA took no action with respect to the all other flavors of disposable products, and so they continue to sell just fine. So hopefully what you take away from this is that the FDA has not been an effective regulator. The FDA could have removed JUUL's products from the market when we realized that JUUL had been deliberately marketing to youth and had been effective in its efforts. Now, despite the failures up to this point, there is potential for change in the future. So the FDA, as I mentioned, has been forced to implement pre-market review for e-cigarettes. After attempting to defer the review of marketing applications to the end of 2022, public health groups sued the FDA and won their lawsuit. Now, the court hearing that case has imposed two important deadlines. On September 9th, earlier this year, manufacturers of e-cigarettes were supposed to file marketing applications for any e-cigarettes that entered the market before August 8th of 2016. If a product did not have an application filed, it is now illegal to sell that product in the US. Also, over the next year, the FDA will be reviewing those applications and acting on them. On September 9th of next year, 2021, any products that have not received marketing authorization from the FDA must be removed from the market until they do receive authorization. So there is a strong possibility that we could see the e-cigarette market cleared of some products soon. However, I would not count on a sea change in the market for a few reasons. First, I fully expect the FDA to be completely overwhelmed by applications in the short term. According to a statement put out by Mitch Zeller, the director of the FDA Center for Tobacco Products, on August 31st, by that date, the FDA had already received applications for 2,000 products. But according to the list of products that the FDA maintains, there could be applications for as many as 400 million products. I doubt there's any question that the FDA won't be able to review that volume of applications in 12 months. There will certainly be some products that have not been authorized by September 9th of 2021. At that point, there must be effective enforcement, and we must see the FDA working to remove illegal products from the market. And there is definitely reason to be skeptical that the enforcement process will go smoothly, as the FDA has been very hesitant to act when products enter the market illegally. We can simply look back at the FDA's efforts since 2016. The beginning of FDA authority over e-cigarettes, again, happens on August 8th, 2016. And that was supposed to freeze the market, whereby no new product could be introduced without the product being authorized through pre-market review. Products that were already on the market could stay, but new products couldn't be sold until after the FDA had authorized them. Now, I'm willing to bet that most tobacco control folks can think of at least a few e-cigarettes that came to the market after that date. But even if you can't, let's look at it this way. In August of 2016, JUUL's market share, as you can see here, was minuscule. At that point, it was actually still a fairly new product, and it wasn't outselling the big tobacco companies. So there'd be no reason for those companies to emulate JUUL's success by introducing similar products, because JUUL was yet to have any success. And yet, all of the large cigarette and e-cigarette manufacturers have introduced products similar to JUUL after August 8, 2016. Some manufacturers weren't even subtle about it. The post-2016 launches of their products were covered by the press and trade publications. There's no mistaking the fact that these products should have never entered the market, and yet the large companies continue to sell these products. The FDA has sent a handful of warning letters to e-cigarette manufacturers regarding products that entered the market after 2016, but the only company among them that you would have ever even heard of is Puffbar, which came under scrutiny by public health groups, Congress, and the media after it became a replacement product for JUUL when JUUL discontinued most of its flavors. And again, the FDA's action came after Puffbar had voluntarily removed its products from the market. It is crystal clear that there is mass violation of pre-market review by companies large and small, and the FDA's compliance and enforcement activities are not even remotely keeping pace. Now, hopefully that will change as we move into the next phase of pre-market review, where FDA authorization is required for products to remain on the market. I think we can hope that because at that point, there should be a much shorter and more discrete list of legal products, because it will only be the products that have received marketing authorization. Now, there is one other aspect of pre-market review that's worth mentioning now. You may recall the FDA authorized the sale of ICOs in the not terribly distant past. And when it did so, it has essentially allowed Altria and Philip Morris International, who jointly market the product in the US, to sell and market ICOs in any way that those companies wish. In granting marketing authorizations, the FDA can put conditions on those authorizations. So, for example, it can limit how companies can advertise a product. However, the FDA put absolutely no restrictions on ICOs. It requires PMI to maintain records of various marketing, but doesn't restrict marketing channels. Now, of particular concern to all of us, the FDA did not limit ICOs advertisements on social media in any way. And the FDA was well aware of the risk given its investigation of JUUL's social media advertising. And despite that, it only requires PMI to maintain records and include disclosures for things like paid influencers. So that was a huge missed opportunity for the FDA. So we should be wary of the FDA making the same mistakes as it begins authorizing the sale of e-cigarettes. Now, before we open it up for questions, and feel free to start submitting them to us, I'll just address one more issue that if I don't say anything about will definitely come up in the questions, I'm sure. Yes, there was an election last month, and yes, the outcome of that election will absolutely affect how the FDA regulates tobacco products. And no, unfortunately, I have no idea and how and to what degree. Anything that anyone says at this point is going to be pure speculation, because some of the driving factors behind policy are still completely unknown at this point. What is certain is that the person who is nominated to head the Department of Health and Human Services and to lead the Food and Drug Administration will definitely have a pretty big impact on what happens in the future. President-elect Biden has not yet identified a nominee for either of those positions. I'm sure we're all acutely aware that those nominees will likely be far more scrutinized for their positions related to infectious disease rather than chronic disease. But hopefully the nominees will have some knowledge of tobacco control policy, and if not, be willing to learn. I can tell you that despite my strong criticisms of the FDA, I do remain encouraged by the leadership at the Center for Tobacco Products. Mitch Steller has been leading that center for quite a few years now. And while he and I don't necessarily see eye to eye on everything, I do think that he cares deeply about the future of FDA tobacco regulation and has led the center through a very uncertain time. The incoming administration has already announced some cabinet level positions, and there's rumors of who will be nominated to lead various health organizations. You've probably seen plenty of information also speculating about who will control the Senate and what sort of impact that might have on the nomination process. At this point, we just don't know with certainty what will happen. Now, one aspect of pre-market review that is certain is the current timeline. Because the deadlines for applications and for securing authorizations have been imposed by a court, they are now out of the FDA's hands, and that remains true regardless of who leads the executive branch. Other FDA priorities and actions that are not governed by litigation are just completely opaque at this point. On that note, actually, if you missed it, we just completed a 3-part webinar series that was centered on the role of litigation in commercial tobacco control, which we're very proud of. All 3 recordings can be found in the webinar section of our website. And we do still have a couple of webinars we'll be hosting before the end of the year. So please definitely sign up for those if they are topics of interest to you. And with that, we'll stop for questions. Mike is going to help me get through as many as we can. Feel free to start entering your questions in the Q&A box if you haven't already. And if you have questions we don't get to, or if you have questions in the future, always feel free to reach out to us. We are happy to help out. All right.
All right. Our first question, Desmond, is about the AATCLC lawsuit on menthol in January. And the questioner wants to know how that might affect e-cigarette regulation, especially on flavors.
That's a good question. And I was going to talk about that a little bit. We did in one of our webinars talk about the AATCLC lawsuit. So if you're not familiar with that, I'll talk about it for a second, but definitely check out that webinar as well. So if you're not familiar, the lawsuit was brought by the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council, Action on Smoking and Health, and a few other groups, the American Medical Association, the National Medical Association. They sued the FDA requesting that the agency take action on menthol in cigarettes, and also that they act on a citizen petition that we filed back in 2013 that requests the FDA to do the same. So that lawsuit is focused on menthol in cigarettes. And in the defense of a motion to dismiss by the government, we found out that the government actually does intend to do something with our petition on by January 29th of next year, which is exciting. Although I would say they haven't said they will grant the petition, just that they will act on it. And so you can actually sort of divide cigarette and e-cigarette regulation, because that petition was centered on menthol in cigarettes, because actually at the time that we filed it, it was long before the FDA had even proposed to regulate e-cigarettes. So if the FDA were to act on that petition and then start a rulemaking process based on it, it would likely be narrowly focused on menthol in combustible cigarettes. However, the FDA's action on flavors that I talked about was focused on, or is using the FDA's enforcement discretion related to e-cigarettes. And it's the pre-market review process, which, because it's enforcement discretion, has a little bit more wiggle room. And one of the reasons that the FDA used for exempting menthol in e-cigarettes from the action on cartridge-based e-cigarettes was that the flavor is still available in cigarettes. And so I suppose there's a logic behind the idea that if you're a menthol cigarette smoker and you want people to move to e-cigarettes, having menthol available as a flavor in those products intuitively makes sense. I'm not sure that the data backs that up, and I'm not a scientist, so I don't know either way. But if you then remove menthol as an available flavor for cigarettes, that logic no longer holds up. So I wouldn't expect the FDA to go back and amend its flavor guidance, because we're sort of in the court-controlled timeline for pre-market review at this point. But I think that if the FDA finally turned the corner on what to do about menthol as a flavor in cigarettes, we could see that as sort of the first domino falling in terms of changing the FDA's the way that it thinks about flavors more generally, and perhaps would open the door for action on flavors more broadly in e-cigarettes, cigars, smokeless tobacco, all other products, and hopefully menthol in particular, because even menthol is a characterizing flavor, but there's also things that happen with menthol, on a chemical biological level that are significantly unique in the realm of flavors. So we know menthol is particularly harmful as an additive in combustible cigarettes, and the same is likely true for other products as well. So that's a long answer to the question of while the lawsuit is not directly related to flavors in e-cigarettes, it is related if you're thinking about flavors holistically, and if you're an advocate, it's definitely, if the FDA acts on flavors, menthol in cigarettes is definitely a foot in the door to act on other flavors as well.
Thank you, Desmond. The next question relates to the dramatic increase of THC vaping among children and adolescents. The questioner wants to find out if there's a correlation of prior e-cigarette use and initiation of THC vaping, and what is the role of the FDA to interfere with this secondary epidemic?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, we know that there's sort of like, there's an interesting nexus of vapor products, nicotine and flavors and THC. And I think, I'm not a scientist, so I don't know that I can answer the core of that question. But I know that there are a lot of people who are working on it, and there's been certainly a lot more research in the last few years. The role of FDA there is unique in a way because of the fact that marijuana is still an illegal drug according to the federal government, and that unfortunately stifles research to a greater degree. The FDA is kind of I don't know that its hands are entirely tied in terms of researching marijuana, but it certainly, as an agency that's part of a federal government where the product is illegal, thinks about marijuana and marijuana research differently than we, a state government may. And until there is a legislative change related to marijuana, THC, cannabis products, the FDA can't really regulate it. It's sort of like when the FDA attempted to regulate cigarettes and smokeless tobacco products in the 90s without a mandate from Congress. Because the executive branch's power is limited by the legislative branch, the FDA really can't step in and regulate those products until the legislature changes things. So that's sort of the way that things land now. But I think, tobacco control researchers are definitely going to have to keep thinking about these and figuring out the best practices in cannabis policy. I know we've been getting lots of questions about it after the first states started legalizing marijuana a few years ago. And at that point, we knew nothing. And the realm of research has grown tremendously since then. And so we really depend on researchers to sort of help us figure out what advice to give to the people who are writing the regulations. And we do have quite a few resources on marijuana regulation on our website, if that's something people are interested in as well. So I'll leave that at that. Let's see. Looks like we have quite a few questions. I can't even keep up with all of them.
Our next question, Desmond.
Yeah.
Is there going to be a list of products that had their pre-market application submitted in time, so local jurisdictions and advocates can look to see if those products are in fact legal?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Not something that I discussed at all, but I can tell you, well, The answer is probably yes, hopefully yes. The FDA did actually commit to providing that list, making it publicly available. It hasn't yet. So applications were due by September 9th. There were plenty of companies filing applications before that, but the deadline was September 9th. What likely happens at that point is that if you are a manufacturer, for example, JUUL, so JUUL has one device and it has had 8 flavors. It could apply for more flavors too. But if you assume that it is working on just or intends to continue selling just its current device and the 8 flavors it has been selling, which come in 2 concentrations. So that's 1 device and 16 different pods. So that's 17 products. It probably only filed 1 application, or submitted only 1 thing to the FDA. And so in creating a list of products that have received an application, the FDA actually has to dig into every single application and extract each of the products to put them into a list. So the FDA might receive 10,000 or 20,000 applications, but that could represent 100 million products. And so like step 1 is just going through every application and putting the products into a list. And so my understanding is that process is still ongoing. And you can imagine based on that, even if you have hundreds of staff working on it, it's going to take a lot of time, and you're going to create a list that's pretty unwieldy. But the FDA has said it will make that list public. I think that's information that should be publicly available. I mean, as tobacco control advocates, it's certainly good information to have. It's good for other regulators at the state and local level to have, because there are definitely products being sold right now that are not going to be on that list. Manufacturers and small mom and pop vape shops that do their own mixing, which is manufacturing under federal regulations, that haven't filed pre-market review applications and don't intend to follow the law. So there are regulators that can use that information. And I think, consumers deserve that information as well. You wouldn't probably buy, an automobile that hasn't been tested for various safety standards. And if I were an e-cigarette user, I would want the federal government to do the same thing with respect to products where there's chemicals I'm putting in my body. So the short answer is that the FDA said it would make that list available, but it has not yet made it available. Hopefully it makes the list available, long before the September 9th deadline. And I would say that it would surprise me if the FDA didn't have also some sort of list next September as well. The FDA has actually been pretty good historically about putting on its website the marketing authorizations that it has granted, and it has been authorizing them. Like I said, ICOs was authorized not that long ago. So that information is more readily available, and I hope that continues, and that after September 9th, if the FDA hasn't, compiled that information in a shorter form list, it's something that one could do based on the information that's on the FDA's website. So there should be some transparency in this process. And I will also say that the FDA, in making marketing authorizations available, does give you a fairly decent amount of information on how it makes the decisions. And so I'm sure there are lots of folks, my team included, who will be scouring those marketing authorizations from companies like JUUL and others to see what sorts of information the FDA is relying on to grant marketing authorizations, and the strength of evidence that manufacturers are presenting to the FDA. So hopefully that continues to be a fairly transparent process, and if anything, becomes more transparent. But again, time will tell. All right. Do we have a lot of other questions, Mike? I'm seeing some things in the chat as well.
Next question revolves around the COVID-19 and e-cigarette use. And the question wants to know if there's any data on the increase in use of e-cigarettes and due to the respiratory issues caused by COVID, or has there been an increase in smoking?
Sure. Yeah. No, that's a good question too. And like I said, unfortunately, not being a scientist, the questions on whether there's data about something is not something I usually know off the top of my head. I mean, I know there's a lot of research out there. I would say if you're sort of looking for the latest on information like that, the Society for Research on Nicotine and Tobacco, SRNT, is an organization filled with the most prominent tobacco control researchers around the world. It's an organization that we've worked with for a long time. They often have that kind of like latest information on their website, and I know they have newsletters as well. And I know that the Truth Initiative also has a fairly large research wing, and I'd be surprised if they didn't have some good information on the intersection of tobacco use and COVID-19 as well. I mean, I know there's a lot of research that's sort of ongoing about whether there are increases in the health effects of both smoking and COVID-19 for people who use products, tobacco products, and are infected with COVID-19. And then there's also, I saw something the other day about research regarding the transmission rates among smokers being higher, and speculating that smokers express more aerosol when they exhale from smoking, and so the virus can carry further too. So there's a lot of cutting edge research out there, and yeah, I would encourage you to find some other resources. Unfortunately, being lawyers, we're not usually on top of the latest scientific information. Yeah, and I think that the state of California also has some information as well, and your state health department may also have information on that as well. Obviously, anyone working in cessation, the pandemic and the possible health effects that are caused from a lung infection are a great quit opportunity, and so I know people are trying to work on getting the latest quit resources out the door as well. So.
We have one final question, Desmond. And the question is, do you comment on MRTP applications during their comment periods?
Sure. No, that's a good question. So we typically comment on most things that the FDA does. And one of the things that we also try to do with our website and our resources is make the process as easy as possible for people who are working in public health. You'll see in the next few months our website being a little bit overhauled, and our FDA Action Center overhauled with it, and hopefully we will have more and better resources to help people with the commenting process. MRTP applications in particular are a very science-informed process, and so again, not entirely our wheelhouse. There have been, and I'm sure will continue to be, applications that have sort of legal defects that are definitely things that we comment on. And there are also typically some of our partners who are more adept at reviewing scientific research will either seek us out for help or offer to allow people to sign on to comments as well. I would say that anyone who has particular expertise on the issues related to MRTP applications, which are typically about the way in which products are marketed and not necessarily like the health effects. So if you're, behavioral scientists and experts in communications, those are the people that the FDA especially needs to be hearing from. I know there were lots of scientists who were commenting on the applications for ICOs. And I think eventually we'll see an MRTP application for an e-cigarette, whether it's JUUL or one of the other companies, who knows, but that again will be a process where public health definitely needs to be involved. The unfortunate way the process plays out is that the FDA is reactive to industry. So it's more of an industry-led process than some of the other things that the FDA does. And so if public health doesn't participate, the FDA simply doesn't hear the response to what the industry has said. So always important to weigh in on anything that the FDA is doing, and hopefully we'll see more FDA regulation in the next year, in the coming 4 years as well. So I think we can wrap it. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for moderating, Mike. Hopefully this was useful for everyone. And again, feel free to join us for more of our webinars in the future. We have a few more coming up, and certainly be announcing next year's slate of webinars soon. So thanks and have a great day.
Bye-bye.